Hello guys, welcome to my Pyke tutorial class. Today I will cover everything I know about Pyke. Okay, let us start with the attribute. Actually, there is 3 ways to play Pyke. One is full agility, the other one is full toughness, and the last one is mix your agility with armor. What build should you play? It depends on your playstyle. I recommend if you are new to Pyke, I suggest you to play full toughness. Okay, next moving on to weapon attribute. The priority attribute you need is piercing damage. So having a high piercing damage or piercing armor penetration is good. Also agility and critical value is also good for Pyke. Okay, next we moving on to the rune. For Pyke's rune, I only point out some rune that you must bring, and the rest of the rune, it depends on your playstyle. So first is this Feline Swiftness. Using Evade increase movement speed by 20%, this effect quickly degrades. So what it means is when you're using your roll or dodge whatever, you get a movement speed buff. I will talk about it later. Since they already fixed this rune, I think every Pyke should bring it. The next rune, Striking Flurry or Stonebreaker, it really depends on you. The next rune I think is important is the critical defense, because you don't want to get one shot by the dual blade. And the last rune I think important is the critical rate. But if you have a high piercing penetration Pyke, I think the damage increase also good. And the rest of the rune, it really depends on you. Now we go training yard, I show you some Pyke's mechanic. Okay, before we talk about the basic attack and skills, let's talk about the roll first. Pyke's roll or evade or dodge, it actually got body blocked by the unit or hero. Let me show that again. If I roll to any other direction, it actually got body block. Even though there is a gap between the unit, I still cannot roll through. Okay, this is another class, this is short sword, and you can see the difference. So Pyke's roll is very different from other classes. And you see after Pyke roll, you see my leg got the blue smoky thing. That's a movement speed buff. Okay, usually I use shift to roll and double tap to sprint. I think that is very different from you guys, because I think roll takes a very important part when playing Pykes. So it's easier when I use shift to roll. Also, you can see that after every time I using the roll, my character will stand there for a second. So you can use block to cancel this animation. Okay, for example, like this. Okay, now we move to the basic attack. Basic attack from Pyke got 3 movesets. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Pyke also have a sprint attack, like this. This sprint attack and basic attack can stack a passive. Each stack will increase your damage by 4%, and the maximum stack is 3 stack. So at final, you can increase 12% of your damage. Also, the damage type of each basic attack is piercing, slashing, and then piercing. The sprint attack is piercing. Okay, next we got the block attack. This deals blunt damage, but unfortunately it cannot stack the passive. But you can use the block to reset your basic attack. For example, like this: piercing, piercing, block, piercing, block. Okay, this is a very important stuff when you are trying to stack your passive, because usually we don't do the second moveset. This second basic attack is so slow and you cannot change the direction, so I think it's not very efficient. Usually how you stack your passive is use the sprint attack once and then use basic attack. If you really want to stack 3 stack, you can do this: 1, 2, 3, and then roll away. Besides of using the block to reset your basic attack, you also can use your skill. For example, like this. Okay, let's moving on to skill. My Q is Wandering Dragon, my E is Raging Monsoon, my out is Soaring Cloud. But in this tutorial, I won't say the skill name. I will just say Q, E, or R. Okay, start with the Q. First stage Q, he do a backflip and then deal slashing damage. It is very different from the evade. Q can go through enemy. After you use Q1, your damage taken will be reduced by 30% for 3 seconds. I often use Q1 to counter Doorblade ulti, so you're gonna predict when the Doorblade gonna stun lock you. But if you did get the Q1, it reduces the Doorblade damage a lot. Okay, now we move to Q2. Okay, Q2 deal 2 times of slashing damage. Also, it increases all damage and armor penetration by 12%. This Q2 is very powerful. We will use it a lot later in our combo. Okay, now we move to Q3. Q3 makes your character leap backward, but it deals no damage. But after using Q3, you get a movement speed buff by 30%. Besides of that, Q3 can also remove the crowd control. There is some important tips about Q3. After you're using Q3, you can use the block to cancel the animation. It's very similar to the dodge block. Q3 block is also the same thing. And in Pyke, every skill you can cancel by using the roll. For example, like I use Q and I use roll to cancel my Q1. Okay? Something like that. But unfortunately, your Q3 are not gonna stack with the Feline Swiftness rune. Okay, so the Q3 and evade stuff, the movement speed doesn't stack. So now I will teach you a combo to escape in some situation. Let's start with this combo. Q, Q roll, block, Q block. We use roll to cancel the second Q, okay? Q, Q roll, block, and then Q block. Okay, let me do it again. Q, Q roll, block, Q block. Now I will add one more thing. After you using block, you will notice that your character is moving slower. So we can cancel that by using sprint and then jump. So let's add this to our combo. Okay, let me do it one by one. Q, Q roll, block, Q block, and then sprint jump. But be careful when you're using this combo. Remember what I said before, Pyke's roll actually blocked by an enemy unit or hero. If you use this combo in the middle of enemy unit, it will get blocked by the unit. So beware of using this combo. This is the example where I get blocked by the Palace Guard. So in some case, I recommend you just use QQQ. Another thing about his Q Wandering Dragon, it actually have a CC immune during his skill. Okay, so in this example, you can see the short sword are trying to charge to CC me, and I use the Q2 to counter it. And also you can use the Q3 to counter the Thunderstruck. So that is very important about his Q. Now we move on to E. Every E he do is piercing damage. The E1 and E2 is very similar. E2 just quicker. We also know that the E2 is 5 meter. It's a bit longer than the roll distance. In my opinion, usually we don't use E in the start of the combat. We only use E when we can confirm to execute our enemy. Because the E1 is very slow, it is very easy to miss. I also saw some people using E2 in his escape combo. So the combo is like this. Q, E, and then Q. If you do it faster, it's like this. But the E got the same issue like the roll. So notice that when using E, my character not go through the enemy. I will get body blocked by the enemy unit. Okay, now let's talk about E3. E3 is the most important stuff when you are playing Pyke. E3 deal 4 times damage, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another thing about the E3 is, you can actually use jump to cancel the E3. It can also follow up by a sprint jump. The large big damage will CC the enemy, and the enemy cannot clear the CC effect. Enemy can use block to counter your last hit, so you won't CC them. But there is a way to counter the block player. For example, this is the example you can do when you are trying to counter block player. The mechanic is before the Pyke launch the final attack, it will do a little dash. So we're gonna use the dash to go to the side of our enemy. For example, like this. So I turn my camera to the side of my enemy. So this is the dash. And then I quickly turn my camera back to my enemy to hit from the side. Okay, now moving to his R, the Soaring Cloud. His R1 is very interesting. It deals slashing damage or blunt damage depend on which side you hit the enemy. You can see this shaft area, it deals blunt damage, and the tips of your Pyke deals slashing damage. This is an example. The 2000 damage is the slashing damage. If I get really close, this 1.2k is blunt damage. His R1, the animation is the shortest compared to the Q1 and E1. So I usually use R1 at the start of my combo. For example, first I use R1, Then I use Q2 because Q2 is very important. It increased my damage, and then E3 to CC the enemy. Moving on to the R2. R2 is per blunt damage. Also, the R2 is very quick and the damage is very high also. And then the R3 is a heavy blunt damage. The animation is very slow, but it can cancel a lot of enemy skill. The most common you use R3 is to counter Pyke's E3. You can see that this Pyke is using E3 and I use R3 to counter him. Other than that, I don't recommend you to use R3 because the R3, you cannot change the direction once you press it. It's very similar to E1 and E2. It is very easy to miss. Using R is a very good way to clear units since every unit have a very low blunt defense. You can also use your R break the Palace Guard block very easily. And R3 is a faster way to apply CC compared to E3. So when you try to CC the unit, especially cavalry, you can use triple R. Also, beside from CC, since the R deal blunt damage is also very good at destroying artillery and breaking doors. Another thing, since that R is very quick, when you knock down your enemy, right, I will usually go 2 passive attack and follow up by 2 R. Okay, like this, A, R, R. Okay, now moving on to his ultimate, the T. Okay, let's start with the Cold Dragon. Cold Dragon charge forward, deal slashing damage. Using this skill is also can remove the CC, like the short sword charge. Cold Dragon is also a very good skill to break the enemy formation. And since the duration is very long, you can stop a large area of cave charge. Besides of that, Cold Dragon can also block arrow. For example, this clip, I used the Cold Dragon and then the longbow ulti, but I will not take any damage. The last thing about this ultimate is you can do some crazy stuff like this. You can use the roll to cancel the ulti and use the final stage of your skill. I will talk about it later. And now finally, the Storm Rain. Storm Rain got 3 different stages. This is the first stage. This is the second. And this is the final stage. Okay, some tips about this ultimate. I recommend you to use Q2 before you use this ultimate, because Q2 gives you a lot of damage increase. And to get to Q2, RQ is a very fast way to do. When you use RQT, even you get CC by the enemy, you see in this case, I still can use Q3 to run away. Besides from that, both Pyke ulti can counter Stormblade and Pole X ulti. Okay, now let's talk about the final stage of your skill. After you use the ultimate, you can use the final stage of your QE or R. The final stage of Q is spin 3 times, dealing slashing or blunt damage. It is very similar to your R, it depends on the distance. So inside the circle it deals blunt damage and outside is slashing damage. This final stage Q is very good for breaking formation, CC enemy cavalry and also destroying artillery. How I usually destroy artillery when enemy is around is I use RR and then use TQ. The Q will knock back the enemy and then use RR again. In practical, you will use the combo more like this. Okay, the final stage of his E is basically a quick E1. But the good thing is, since you see the E1, E2 cannot go through the enemy, right? But E final stage can pierce through enemy. So it is also a very good way when you're trying to escape. Most of the time you will miss the final stage E. So what you can do is, you can do something like this. You can see I cancel my Storm Rain after I hit my enemy. By using the roll, you can do some crazy stuff like this. Okay, now moving on to the final stage of R. Yeah, we're almost done. This final stage of R is to grab the enemy. But if you do it so early, you will actually miss it. So the best way is use the basic attack before you R. You will also get a damage increase, right? So overall it's better. Another thing I want to add, if you out in front of your enemy, it is the front attack. So this is the white number, okay? If you go to his back, you get the back attack. There is also a technique that you can get a back attack while the enemy is facing you. So this should be like this. I'll turn camera. You see I can position my enemy. To done this, you actually don't need to press any button after you use R. Just turn your mouse wheel to the direction you want. So you see this mole, I out it in front of him and I go to the edge of the wall. In this case, I press R already and then I turn my camera to this edge. So the mole will end up in this position. So what if I press W? My character will actually turn. So the tip is don't press any button. So the final should be like this. Okay, the final part, let's talk about the mount, the horsey. As horse right, the left click is very simple, dealing piercing damage. I want to talk about the right click. The right click, it deals blunt damage. Also, you can dismount enemy using this skill, and when you are using this skill, it gains extra movement speed. And also, it is a very good way to break enemy unit formation. And also stop the siege tower. His Q deal blunt damage and CC enemy. We usually follow up by an ART. Okay, for example, like this. You can also cancel the Q animation by using roll. You need to do it in a very short time, okay? Or otherwise it won't happen. Like this. If you see enemy cav charging in, you can do this. Very quick. If you are jumping from a high ground and use Q before you land, you and your horse actually don't take any damage. And now I think we have learned all the stuff. I just want to show you my favorite combo. So this is the end of the lesson. I hope you guys learned something. This is a very long video, so I hope you enjoyed that. And thank you guys for watching. See you in the next video. Have a good day. Bye bye.